Hello and welcome to the Ohio Arts Council's Rife Gallery programming series for our current exhibition, All We Cannot Forget, curated by Shar Norman. Today we are thrilled to present artist Tony Williams. As a brief reminder, everyone tuning in today is in listen-only mode, so feel free to utilize that chat function to ask your questions. We'll be sure to get to them at the end of the talk. Also keep in mind, because we're presenting from separate locations, there may be variation in bandwidth, so just stay tuned and we'll get through it. Welcome, Tony.
Good morning. I'd like to thank the Ohio Arts Council and the Rife Gallery, Kat Sheridan, and the staff. Shar Norman for curating this wonderful exhibition. And I'm honored to be a part of. My name is Tony Williams, and I'm a fiber artist working with paper and indigo. I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, and I was raised on the east side of Cleveland in a neighborhood called Huff, on Huff Avenue. I lived above the Astor Theater. In the mid-60s, we had the Huff Riots. I lived through the Huff Riots, moving to Glenville, only to enter into the Glenville Riots. Life was pretty good after that. I entered high school at Cleveland Central Catholic, where I met Sister Alberta, and my life changed. She introduced me to the world of drawing and painting. I had been doing crafts, but I had not really pursued drawing or painting until high school. And as I said, my world just really opened up and things changed. I entered multiple poster contests during that time, and the Scholastic Arts program we entered every year. Finally getting a piece to go to New York, receiving a Key New York. Then I went to school, art school at CIA, the Cleveland Institute of Art. And I was there and I felt really lost. I felt like a little fish in a big pond and didn't know how to get my grounding. So I left there and went into the workforce. And a year later, I heard that Sister Alberta had passed away. And upon going to her funeral, it was the catalyst for me going back to school. I ended up at the Art Institute of Pittsburgh, where I studied fashion illustration and visual communications, i.e. graphic design. In 1998, I started having conversations with my grandmother about, she would tell me stories about her life, her grandmother, her mother, and I got this family history and wasn't real sure what I was going to do with it. And then I started compiling those stories, and that became a show called Juke, which I produced in 2000. But in that story, I included some information about Charleston and the Gullah Geechee Islands. And I had no idea that later in life I would end up in Charleston for, of all things, a quilt show. It was a quilt show for the 9th annual African American Fiber Exhibition. And the show was based on Maya Angelou. And I created this quilt, Phenomenal Woman, which is where I met this group of phenomenal women. And these women took me under their wing and guided me and told me how to create a quilt, what I needed to do. They also took me on an unbelievable journey into the city of Charleston and its history. Driving past these wonderful iron gates created by African Americans was really enlightening. But I also learned the cruelty of the South, and Charleston being one of the ports that slaves were brought to. So we went to the slave market, and Mother Emanuel Church. But I also learned about indigo. And I don't think I had really knew anything about indigo other than it was a part of the rainbow. And it was a color in the Crayola box. But I didn't know that it was derived from plants and its importance to me and my heritage. And that we were brought here for our knowledge of this plant and how to extract the indican from the plant and produce the dye. Eliza Lucas Pinckney is accredited with establishing indigo in South Carolina. And that is a wonderful story that she was a 16-year-old girl that had just finishing school from Antigua, and her father sent her to the States because they had 3 plantations. She had studied botany and was interested in growing plants. So he would send her seeds, and she tried for 3 years to try and grow crops that would be prosperous and economically suitable for that area. She, with the help of her enslaved, were able to grow indigo in South Carolina. Indigo is an interesting plant in that it's very hard to get started. But once you get it started, it has a wonderful growing span, and that meant they were able to produce a beautiful bounty of indigo. This plant, the interesting thing about this is that we were brought to this country because of our knowledge of how to extract indigo, how to extract the indican to make the dye, which meant that it became very prosperous for South Carolina. And Eliza Lucas taught the other plantation owners how to grow it. But in doing so, it increased the amount of slaves that needed to come to process this crop, because it's a laborious process in that the plant is cut and seeped in water and let ferment. And then you have to extract the water and add oxygen to the water to get the indican to drop to the bottom of the vat. Because of the fermentation and because the slaves were in this water constantly, it was toxic. The vats were usually urine vats because they were in the vats working, and they would just urinate in the vat, and that added to the fermentation process, which increased the amount of flies that were around. But that also made it one of the largest cash crops in the United States. As the information spread from South Carolina and the other plantation owners, England started to offer the growers 6 pence to grow indigo because of the insatiable appetite for indigo in Europe. So more slaves were needed. We all have a pair of denim. Denim, an interesting cloth, once called slave cloth. It was considered to be not fit for humans, but fit for grain and for the enslaved to wear. Slave quarters. A lot of my work is derived from my ancestors. And this particular piece is a pulp painting that is about the stories that I was told from my grandmother. The importance of indigo and cotton and working in the fields. This piece, Fabric of Our Lives, is a paper quilt made of kozo paper and dyed with indigo and coffee. These Spanish moss draped oak trees on a pathway to the Sea Island cotton plantation of McLeod Plantation. McLeod Plantation is an interesting place because it was one of the places that produced Sea Island cotton. This quilt is also kozo paper, indigo, and pulp painting. Pulp painting is done. This next piece is also a pulp painting with indigo. This is one of my artist books. And this is an interesting piece because you have to remove the glass cloche to be able to read the story. And people think it's the small book that's on the ground, but it's not. It is actually the figure. And you have to unnoose him to read the story within. Then you have to re-noose him, hang him once again to replace the dome. So people are really moved by this piece and they're not sure if they want to read it because it's a troubling process, the act of hanging someone. Even though this isn't a real person, just the ideal of hanging someone is kind of gut-wrenching. This is a large pulp painting called In Search of My Father. In this particular piece, I have cut the figure away from the substrate, so it is actually hanging away from the image, and the rope extends into the room so that you are a part of that whole process. I usually calm the images. When I show those images, I show images of praise and worship because they were used as relief to get through the difficulty of being enslaved. So these are images of pulp paintings of praise dancers. Pulp painting, a sheet of paper is pulled, and with either stencils, a brush, squeeze bottles, spoons, you can either draw freely or use stencils to create these images. The images are created with finely beaten pulp that has been dyed. You can use multiple stencils to create many layers and depths by just brushing a light coating on, of paper pulp, you get a different effect. This piece is a pulp painting using the same stencil, and by the way the color was applied, it implies the movement of dance. In 2019, I was asked to create burial shrouds for 32 enslaved that were exhumed in the process of adding an extension to one of the arts buildings in South Carolina. Artists from all over the country and created these funeral shrouds. And there was a large celebration for the reinterment of these 32. One of the pieces that I created was I Surrender All, which is cotton waxed and batiqued with indigo. Wade in the Water is also on cotton, indigo and waxed, and the Adinkra symbol. These were the three pieces that I created for those individuals to be reinterned in. Upon arriving at the site that morning, I looked at the crypt lid and was astonished to see my image adorning the top with the names of the 32 that were being reinterred. Not all of the pieces were buried with the ancestors. Some of the pieces ended up at the McLeod plantation, where C. Ellen cotton was grown. Two of the pieces that I created were not buried. They are currently hanging at the McLeod plantation, which is a tremendous honor. This is a place where my ancestors toiled in the fields, and now my art lives inside. In 2019 was a good year. I did lots of work that year. This is a piece called Airing Your Dirty Laundry, and it is a 15 by 60-foot banner that was created with 1,500 square cotton panels that were waxed and dyed with indigo. We went out into the community and had community members dye squares. They were allowed, they dyed 2 squares, one for themselves and one for the banner. One of the things that the naming of this piece is because to air your dirty laundry means that you're exposed. It is a conversation opener. What's interesting is this banner hung from the Detroit Superior Bridge, which spans from the east to the west, which racially separated Cleveland. Cleveland's east side is where the African Americans lived, and the west side is where the other races lived. And very rarely did they ever cross. So this was, again, a chance to talk about indigo in this country, African Americans, denim, and what that conversation needs to be, that it needs to be had. Loving Sankofa. is recycled denim. This was a quilt created for the African American quilt exhibition in South Carolina. And Sankofa is an Adinkra symbol, meaning to go back and fetch it, so that you remember what has happened in the past so that you can move forward. Mermaid Warrior. This is a large 10-foot by 30 indigo quilt created in 2023. Yemenya. This is a Kozo paper batik dyed with indigo. Olokun is an articulated figure that is dyed in indigo and kola nut. I never wear gloves. My hands are always blue. I just refuse to wear them. My ancestors didn't wear them. And there is something about the feel of indigo. There's an energy that passes through you when you're using the vat. This is a Kozo portrait of Jeremy dyed with indigo on Kozo paper. This is Belinda, also on Kozo paper. This is a multi-layer dyed batik. Each color is saved in wax as the next color is applied, and then finally dyed in indigo. And the wax is removed and the colors are exposed. This is an artist book I created for a conversation in black and white. We were paired with an artist that we didn't know of another nationality, and we were given these topics, and I was given the LGBTQIA plus topic. And at first I didn't know where I was going with it, and then it hit me that it was a timeline, and it's basically a timeline of my life and the LGBT movement and where we are from the 60s to today. This is a piece that is done with cassava, a cassava paste, painted with a feather. This is a traditional technique done in Nigeria. Walking with My Ancestors. This is a series of articulated figures made of Kozo paper that are stitched multi-layers, waxed and dyed in indigo. Black Gold, created for, again, the fiber exhibition in South Carolina in 2019. She is entirely made of paper. Her jewelry is paper. Her garment is made of Kozo paper that has been pleated, quilted, beaded, and then dyed. She has traveled from South Carolina to Tasmania for Paper on Skin. She returned to go to Chicago for Black Creativity. She's been exhibited in Cleveland at the Artist Archives of the Western Reserves. She has been to the Rife Gallery in Columbus. She has been in Zanesville and the Medici Gallery. I'm not sure where she's headed next, but I'm sure she'll be traveling again soon. This Sashiko paper jacket is hand-stitched with white cotton thread. It also went to Australia for Paper on Skin. Indigo Ripple is a piece that was created out of, not many people know what it is. It is created out of paper used for it's called end wraps. It's what's used to curl Black women's hair. You would take the end wrap and put it and slide it down to the end of the hair and then roll the roller in it. These are end papers. This piece went to Australia as well. The Wadubi vest is exploring African textiles, patterns, creation of beads made of paper. It also went to paper on skin. The albino warrior. She was created after George Floyd's death. And there was the onslaught of Black Lives Matter, and it was all over yard signs and t-shirts. And she is basically created to say that it's more than just a slogan on a t-shirt. She is to be seen, she is to be heard. Her life is important. And that all lives are important, and we all have a purpose. Up from the Streets, a celebration of hip hop, 50 years, is a quilted paper puffer outfit. It's adorned with subway trains and boom boxes and DJs and mixtapes, breakdancers. Ain't Nothing But the Blues and Jazz is a celebration of the blues, which came from juke joints in the South, moving north, becoming jazz in the Cotton Club and other places. It is adorned with names of blues and jazz singers from the 20s to today. The names are embroidered on this Kozo paper garment that's dyed in indigo. The silver coat is also painted with indigo. I Remember Sky is a celebration of what is considered African textile, but really isn't. It is a Dutch wax cloth. Dutch wax cloth is not African. It was produced for another reason, and Africans have adopted this patterning, this brightly colored, sometimes really exaggerated patterns. But this is a celebration into what that is. It is indigo dyed on handmade paper from the Morgan Conservatory, and it's beaded with wooden beads. It has a paper necklace that is also adorned with wooden beads. This was done in 2024. And the piece that we all came to see is the history of indigo in America. It's a jumping doll representational of Eliza Pinckney and the enslaved that helped bring indigo into this country. My self-portrait on Kozo paper. Thank you.
Wonderful, Tony. Thank you so much. Folks, if you have questions, please pop them into the chat and we'll get to them. So, Tony, first off, let's start at the beginning. So lots of folks struggle finding their way in college, but it's not often talked about. So one, thank you for honoring us with that information. But would you please share with us what changed and what was different with your experience in Pennsylvania, and how might you offer a piece of sage advice to someone perhaps experiencing something similar?
What changed? Well, it was a different avenue. The Cleveland Institute of Art is a school for fine arts. It is a place that you go if you want to be a studio artist. And I was just overwhelmed. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I knew when I graduated from high school, I knew I wanted to go to art school and come back and be a teacher, take her spot. Um, so I wanted to go and become an art teacher. And then I got there and it was like, oh, this is interesting. There was jewelry design, there was weaving, there was medical illustration, and it was just overwhelming. I had taken classes there during the summers, so I thought I was prepared, and I was just really overwhelmed. So I needed to take a breather. It's interesting when you leave your small pond and go into this big ocean, and you're like, I used to be pretty good. I don't know if I have what it takes to be here. These people are so much further than I am. But as I said, the catalyst for me going back to school was her death. It was like, oh no, I got to get back to it. So the Art Institute of Pittsburgh was basically commercial art, which was a whole nother realm of art, and it's usually frowned upon, but it is a very important aspect of art because it is the practical application of art. It is how clothing is designed. It is how we buy merchandise. It's because an artist designed the package that you're looking at in the store and you pick it up and oh, this is cool. This coffee cup is beautiful because an artist touched it. Um, so I think it's really important that we don't frown upon the craft, um, because that is the basis of all art is its craft. That's where it comes from. And I don't really understand why we have this separation of high art, low art. Um, if it weren't for the craftsmen that made the pottery and painted on the cave walls, there would not be a Picasso, there would not be a Rembrandt. Um, so I think there needs to be some real clarification in how we approach art. Um, One of the things I found during my journey through art school was and 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 school was incorporating my art into my traditional studies. So I would get a book report and it would be an elaborate book report because I had illustrations, um, which nobody else was doing. But that was how I applied my art to my education. I was also a student that was dyslexic. So for me, hands-on is how I learn. Um, my artistic journey has been very interesting because I've done costuming, uh, I've worked in the garment industry, I've come back come back to drawing and painting, and it is different this time. It's more expressive. I am more connected to what I do. For me, it's more than painting a pretty picture. There's some tooth in the art that I'm creating.
Tony, thank you so much for that answer. A few people have made comments that I think you should know. So Paula says, Tony is my sister, Alberta, and she is forever grateful. Thank you for your vulnerability. Karen says, we are our own worst critics. And Julie says, thank you so much, Tony. I learn from you each and every day. And Karen also said, I love how you tie heritage to your art and also show the versatility of paper as a medium. So on that subject, I'd love for us to kind of dovetail there. There is a deep connection to hand in your artwork. Like your hand is directly apparent in all of the works that you create. And so there's this double play there happening where you're honoring your ancestors and the toil of enslaved people, and also, you know, placing yourself in a space of direct contact with material and material becoming subject. So can you talk a little bit about that journey and maybe a bit about one of the processes, like for example, pulp painting? It is so specific and really not an easy thing to do. So if you can help kind of ground folks in why your pulp paintings are as impressive as they are. You know, when you try something, you learn, but not a lot of folks are going to try pulp painting. So I have said enough words. I'm going to hand it back to you.
Well, pulp painting is interesting because I did a residency at the Morgan Conservatory, and I had never done pulp painting. And I went in and I knew exactly what I wanted to do for my residency. I was going in to do the articulated figures, and Tom Balbo said, "No, you can do that at home. You're going to do pulp painting, and we're going to do these large pulp paintings, these 7 foot tall pieces." And I'm like, okay. So he's like, we're going to pull this sheet. And we pulled the first sheet, and he's like, okay, hit it, go into it and start working. And I'm like, I don't know what I want to draw. I was really unsure of what I wanted to do. I'm like, I can't work like this. It's so rare that I get an opportunity to really work because I work a full-time job as well. So when I sit down to create, it is with a purpose, and I need to make it count. So that first piece was interesting, but I went home and started cutting stencils and came back the next day and was ready to go. Um, I had seen other people do it, um, but it was just kind of intuitive for me. I don't know. I guess
I suppose that would be intuitive based on many decades of experience, right?
I think it was intuitive for me because I had done other crafts. I had done lots of projects that required handwork.
And Tony, can you talk a little bit about what the act of making is for you?
Hmm. It it depends on if I'm doing something for a show or if I am just experimenting. If I'm just exploring, um, there is something that will start that spark for me, and it will take me on a journey. And a lot of my work requires research that I didn't necessarily start out to do, and that and which ties back to how I learn is through that research, and just experimenting. Um, I wish I had more time to experiment and try new things. But I think every time I start a new project, it is a new experiment because I'm always trying to do something different. I don't necessarily want to repeat what I've done in the past. And that is rather difficult, because you're not really building on the foundation that you have. You're exploring, trying to find something new to do. Um, hmm, I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yeah, that's great. If that feels good to you, it feels good to me too. I'm curious about your articulated figures. So they speak a little bit to paper dolls. They speak a little bit to shadow figures and puppetry. And so I'm curious if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about what motivated you to go down that road, if there were inspiration that you were looking at. And then I have a second question when you finish answering that.
Okay, so the articulated figures came out of walking through the Morgan's Gallery, and there's the outside wall is this long flat wall with no interruptions, and I was like, it'd be really cool to walk through here and see this figure walking with you as you're walking down this hall. And so that's where that concept came from, is that I wanted to walk with my ancestors, and just exploring what I could do with indigo and what I could do with paper. Um, so
Wonderful. And then how do you know when one of your pieces is finished?
oh, they talk to you. They talk to you. They tell you when they want more and when they're done. And when they're done and you go that extra, it's usually the wrong thing to do. Um, yeah, I just experienced that. I did not listen to the piece, and I decided it needed to be framed. And I sent the pieces to the gallery, and I got an email the next day stating that the pieces arrived, but the frames were damaged, so they couldn't display them in the frames. These pieces were never meant to go on these frames, but I decided, oh, it needs to be in a frame, and that was not what they wanted. That's not what the universe wanted for me. So they ended up unframed and hanging a different way. They're still beautiful. They're wonderful pieces that I've done. So I'm very happy that that was the final outcome. But that's the second guessing yourself, which is dangerous. I mean, it usually backfires on you. So you have to listen to your gut.
Thank you for that. So, Tony, if folks are curious about your work, obviously they can go and visit TonyWilliamsArtist.net. But what's next? Do you have any shows coming up that folks should look for?
What's next? I am currently working on a quilt for the African American Fiber exhibition in South Carolina. Um, and it's an interesting piece because it's a piece honoring your ancestors. So it is already taking me on several tangents. I'm not sure where I'm going. I have 3 or 4 ideas that I'm working with. I'm trying to figure out which one I'm supposed to do. But yeah, I'm excited to see what's next.
All right. And lastly, if you have anything to offer for folks who are interested in indigo or paper making, what would be a piece of advice that you have for anyone who is either just joining that exploration or perhaps at the beginning of their journey?
Mm, I would say for both, just enjoy the process. They're both process based, but there's a lot of experimentation in both. In the fibers that you choose to use to make paper, the inclusions that you put in the paper, um, the variety of indigo vats that you can make, and the variety of techniques used to create pattern, from tying and knotting to painting with a feather to using wax or using all of them together. Yeah, it's the possibilities are endless. Just allow yourself time to explore. Um, I say my work is ancestor driven because I have had never had an indigo class, and I started doing it without any instruction. So when I create a vat, it is from my ancestors that I know how to do what I do. Um, I have since doing it, I've been doing this about 8 years now. I have had one other class with a master teacher. And he's like, "You don't really need me," which is phenomenal. But yeah, it is. I think when you find what it is you're supposed to do, um, or it finds you, you're set. Um, I've always liked paper. I never knew that I wanted to make paper, and I never knew that I wanted to make garments out of paper. But that has been one of the avenues that I've gone down and have really enjoyed. And for me, creating this garment is not necessarily a garment; it's a sculpture. It's to be viewed as a piece of art and not a piece of clothing that you see in a department store. So I'm flipping the script on how you interpret this work.
That's great. And so Tony, I'm curious, do you ever offer workshops? Do you teach?
Yes. I actually will be teaching a workshop this summer as a part of the quilt exhibition we're doing. A week long workshop. So there'll be other instructors teaching different techniques. So
All right.
that
So folks,
opportunity is coming up.
if you have
I'm
interest
sorry?
in learning with Tony, make sure you check out his website and follow him on socials to find a way to be in community with Tony. So I want to thank you again, Tony, so much for the generosity of your time and your talent. Thank you all for joining us for this Artist Talk by Tony Williams as a part of our programming for the exhibition, All We Cannot Forget. A special thank you to the curator, Shar Norman, and a big thank you to all the other participating artists, as well as the Ohio Arts Council's board, the Ohio legislature, and the governor who support the Ohio Arts Council, this great space, and of course, Ohio artists. Thanks everyone and have a great day.
Thank you.